Hey Phantom fans, you're watching Chronicle Chamber. My name is Scott, and today we're talking about Phantom 2040: A New Shadow, Episode 2, The Fallen Star from Comics Kingdom. You watched my last review on the site. Episode 1, it was our introductory episode into this, sequel, new imagination, kind of reboot of the Phantom 2040 franchise in web comic form. That one was very much a, fast-paced action driver where we're introduced to our hero Carlos, and he's on the run from these machines. And he, spoiler if you haven't read the issue, he runs into, Phantom 2040 at the end of the issue. So in episode 2, we take a step back. And, going into this, there was a creator interview released by Comics Kingdom with series writer Alex Segura. And he mentioned episode 2 would be, something that takes place before the events of episode 1, kind of the preceding event. And so episode 2 really is our, character study of who our characters are. We're introduced to Carlos, more deeply than just a man on the run. We are introduced to Mel, who seems like it's kind of a love interest character from his past. And then we're introduced to Charles Tyrus, who is the, tech magnet villain of this series. And there are also little callbacks and nods to Phantom 2040 for those who either watched the show or played the Super Nintendo game. So in this episode, a lot of it deals with heroism and not being who we want to be or who we used to be. And so what I mean by that is, the episode's centered on Carlos, and Carlos he's a former soccer star who is now covering these events for news outlets. So he's coming with his recording equipment. He's going to set up and film whatever it is he's going to film, probably a match. But we have flashbacks from his previous life where he was this big soccer star, well known around the world. He was known as Phantasma de Football, or the Phantom of Football. And he's also known for having scored 3 goals in a single game, not once, but twice, as we find out in a conversation with him and his boss. And over the course of this conversation, there's a big announcement on the stadium screen, and we learn that tech magnate Charles Tyrus is going to hold a press conference or something and give this big announcement of some findings, something that's supposed to bring back hope. And, he references the idea of a hero that people might find, with this announcement he's doing. And for Phantom 2040 fans, he's doing this announcement in the Ghost Jungle, which, if you remember what that is, for those who don't know or those who can't remember, the Ghost Jungle was basically the Phantom's secret hideout where he stashed his stuff in the cartoon. It was, it's this area where it was kind of ripped apart by environmental hazards, by a train accident. You can watch the cartoon and learn more about it, but essentially this is kind of where the Phantom operates, in this 2040 landscape. And so this announcement's happening there. The boss for Carlos leaves to go attend this announcement. Carlos stays behind because while it's enticing and, he's curious what it is, he has a job to do, and his new mantra is to lay low. And that is kind of the, plays at the duality and theme of this issue, is this concept of, here he was, soccer star, had it all, led the charge, scored the goals, won the game for the team, at one point. And now, months later, he is just a guy doing his job, trying to lay low. A character from his, previous life, Mel, enters the scene, and she notes that she hasn't talked to him in months, but she, always used to look up to him. He, saved her one point in time. We find out through some dialogue. And, she's going to go to this event. She's trying to coax him to do it. He's very resistant, and that's, what we see, this kind of reluctant hero, but he's thinking about it. It's entering his mind. When the word hero pops up, he thinks about how he hasn't looked up to a hero in a long, long time. It's kind of a coded, veiled statement. We don't really know what that means. It seems like the creative team is hinting at something deeper that we'll probably find out in the course of the next 18 episodes we have of this webcomic. But, it's enticing enough. It tells us that there's a thread there that, is going to start pulling at Carlos and driving some of this momentum forward. So, we don't have a lot of punching, kicking, and jumping this episode. We do get a lot of soccer, so if you're a soccer fan, you're going to love that. But we do get an interesting, placement of the dynamic between our three core people: Carlos, Mel, and Mel's relationship with Carlos, and how she's kind of a support figure, coming back from the past to, help reinvigorate him and bring him back to who he once was. And then Charles Tyrus, who is your standard tech magnet. Obviously there's a lot in this series that's inspired by what's going on right now. There's a lot of comments peppered in here from the writing team that, hints at, that reflects how many of us probably feel about the world right now. And that's all I'll say on that. The art is, it's fun. It's great. It's well told. There's a perfect balance between, dialogue and narration from Alex Segura and Michael Moresi, and, illustration from John Amore. There's, the interrupting, flashbacks that kind of draw us in and show us rather than just tell us everything. I mean, there's plenty of dialogue, but, we have enough of those visuals to really kind of let that sink in of who Carlos is, what's going on, and where we might be going with this. If you want more Phantom news, reviews, etc., you can check out chroniclechamber.com. If you want to hear more from me personally, you can find me on Threads at writer_Scott or on Blue Sky at writerscott@bsky.com. Otherwise, I will catch you next time when we review the Phantom 2040, A New Shadow, Episode 3.